Good evening, everyone. My name is Renee Zimmerman, and I will be your moderator this evening. I would like to welcome you to tonight's telephone town hall meeting. And for those of you who are wondering if you are connected, you definitely are. But right now you are in what is called listen-only mode, which means that you can hear me, but I cannot hear you. So in just a moment, I will introduce to you Andy Wappler from Puget Sound Energy, who will say a few words, and then we will open it up for questions. But first, let me go over a few housekeeping items. If you'd like to ask a question, it is very easy. At any time, you can press *3. Remember that number. Press *3 on your touch-tone phone, and you will be able to be put in line to speak with one of our staff members. And they will take down your name and where you're calling from, and then we will try to get to your question just as quickly as possible. And the next time you hear your name, you will then be live with the entire group, and you will be able to ask your question directly. Now, I know this sounds a little bit kind of a bit of a lot, but trust me, it's extremely simple. And if you have any questions, you can ask our staff members while they are taking down your name. We will also be visiting with you all for a while tonight, so there should be ample time to take a number of questions from you. So feel free to go ahead and press *3 now if you'd like to ask a question. So now, I'd like to turn the conversation over to Andy Wappler from Puget Sound Energy. So please help me welcome Andy. Andy?
Hey, thanks, Renee. Well, good evening, everybody. Thanks for joining us on a beautiful and sunny Puget Sound area night. Gorgeous summertime weather. I'm Andy Wappler. I'm Vice President of Customer Operations and Communications at Puget Sound Energy. And I'll talk just a little bit here quickly, a few remarks to set things up, and then it's time to get to the questions. So what we're talking about here tonight are our clean energy efforts, things we'd like to do to partner with the island on a better energy future, and also our work to improve reliability on the island. We've been proud to serve Bainbridge for decades, be a part of the community, and we take our relationship with our customers seriously, and a chance like this to listen to everyone and hear your interests is really great. We certainly hear from our customers about clean energy and probably nowhere more than we do on Bainbridge Island. So we'll talk about that tonight. And I think the great news is we're taking a lot of important steps already in that direction, including a commitment to reduce our carbon footprint and also retiring several coal-fired power plants by the end of this year, and then, of course, wind and solar here in Washington. And more recently, with the legislature and the governor, we worked to develop some historic legislation that will accelerate that transition to clean energy and really make Washington a leader. We'll talk about that process here tonight and also how you can partner with us to make even more clean energy possible. And, of course, we hear about reliability and outages, not so much on a nice summer night like this, although you never know, but not so much on a nice summer night like this, but certainly over the winter time. We had a very stormy winter, so reliability always matters. And we'll be talking about that a bit, too. Meantime, let's get to your questions and your priorities.
So we'd like to go ahead and take first questions, and I'd like to remind you all, if you do have a question, please press *3 on your phone, and you will be connected to someone who will take down your question. So it looks like we have our first question right now from Jennifer. It seems like a solution to the outages and our trees to put all of the wires underground. Is that feasible?
Undergrounding certainly is a popular topic, and I get why. And actually, more than half of our system on the island is underground today, about 56% of it. So we have a substantial amount of the power already underground, but can we bring more? And the answer is yes, but it can be expensive, and you can't build it everywhere. It's easier to build underground when you're talking about those neighborhood lines, the distribution lines that take the power really to your house. What's a little bit more challenging are the transmission lines, the bigger voltage lines that carry the power onto the island and then to the substations where it gets divided up and out to neighborhoods. And there are a couple of issues there. One is the cost, and in Washington, that cost, because it's really a visual benefit, is something the community would have to pay the difference for. The other, though, that I think is really even more important than likely the cost, is that when we think underground, at least I know before I started working at the utility 12 years ago, I tended to think underground meant kind of invisible and no impact. The reality is when the power is underground, it's actually fairly high impact to build because you have to build for transmission lines, a pretty big trench to put it in, and you actually still have to remove trees. And an arborist explained it to me one time that the tree branches and the tree roots stick out just about as far from the tree trunk. So if you look at a big tree, you see the tree branches sticking way out. Well, the tree roots come out just about as far. And if you put underground power lines next to those trees, you actually have to take the tree out even though the line is underground, because it can damage the tree and weaken the roots. So undergrounding is a bit more high impact than maybe we all think. Good news, though, today, almost 60%, 56% of the island's power lines are underground, and there are options to go to more undergrounding in the future. I think, though, it's just important to understand it is higher impact than we might all think, and that impact can include trees and other construction impact, too.
Thanks for that question, Jennifer. Now we'd like to go ahead and ask a poll question for you guys. And I'm going to read the question twice. The question is, what is the most important issue facing the state of Washington today? Press 1 for education. Press 2 for environmental issues, including climate change. Press 3 for homelessness and housing affordability. Press 4 for transportation. Press 5 for public safety. Again, the question is, what is the most important issue facing the state of Washington today? Press 1 for education. Press 2 for environmental issues, including climate change. Press 3 for homelessness and housing affordability. Press 4 for transportation. Press 5 for public safety. And while we tally the poll, we would like to go to the next question. Brian, you're on the air with Andy Wappler to talk about House Bill 1512. You're live.
Hello, Andy. House Bill 1512 passed during the previous session. It allows PSE to increase their rates a small amount as long as they use the money to build out electric charging infrastructure in Washington State. Do you have any plans to build charging stations on Bainbridge Island?
We are working with our customers to do that, and have had a couple of cool pilot programs, both to help customers with charging stations in their homes as well, because, of course, if you have a car, you might want to have the charging station in your home. Don't have firm plans yet on what we'll be building in Bainbridge Island and elsewhere, but the good news is the state law, as you point out, did change. That will allow us to do more of that charging infrastructure, and I think we'll see even more of it coming here in the future through the clean energy transition. And I think for consumers, they're really beginning to see, and I'm sure like you, I see now a lot of electric cars on the road, and a bit of that range anxiety or the fear that we won't be able to go far enough is one of the holdbacks, but quickly that is fading. And if we can be a part of building charging stations and helping make that happen, that would be fantastic. And certainly if you're concerned about carbon and concerned about greenhouse gases, I'm guessing if you're on the line tonight you probably are, about half of our state's emissions are on the road. So if we aren't able to address those emissions with, say, electric cars and maybe in the future electric trucks, we're not really going to make as big a difference in terms of such an important issue as we could. So PSC would certainly like to be a part of that. And when we announced in 2017 our goal to cut our carbon to 50%, that was part of it, was what can we do to help take those fossil fuel vehicles off the road and use electric where we can. And I'm excited. I'm a car guy. I've enjoyed electric cars and I've ridden in them. I think people are going to find that that is a great, convenient, and low-impact way to drive and get the things done they need to get done.
Thank you, Brian, for that question. And we're going to go ahead and go to Kira from Tacoma. Kira, you're live to ask a question about ferries.
That Washington State is going to electrify the ferries that run between Bainbridge and Seattle. And I was curious if PSC was working on this with the state and what's the status of that project.
It's pretty exciting, isn't it? You know, I always find that nothing makes you feel like you're here in our home, in our Puget Sound, more than riding a ferry. and the idea that the ferries could advance and become even a cleaner form of transportation, and as a group form of mass transit, they're already a great way to get people around, but if we can electrify, even better. We've really appreciated with the State Department of Transportation and the ferry system being at the table, helping them think about electric ferries, helping them plan for electric ferries, and certainly if electrification comes, and I think it will, between Bainbridge Island and Seattle, as well as the other runs, that is going to mean an upgrade to the infrastructure. Right now, those ferries, of course, at Eagle Harbor would connect to our Winslow substation, which is the southernmost substation we have on the island, and it is one that unfortunately suffers some outages. So fixing that infrastructure, making it more reliable, will be one key to helping make those ferries cleaner. But it really does look like the state is working to move ahead, and we have tried to be a good partner to them in helping them realize that vision. Cleaner ferries, avoiding perhaps some fuel costs that go up and down, and providing reliable service. It seems like a pretty good deal all around.
We'll go to our next caller. Lisa, you're on live with Andy Wappler.
Hi, Andy. I was curious about some ways that we could help, or we could reduce our own carbon use.
You know, there's a lot, and it was interesting that a lot of folks are feeling like you do. A couple of years ago, we actually did a survey, and we asked our customers about climate and energy, and what was not surprising was about 70-some% of our customers said, yeah, I'm really concerned about climate, and I'm concerned about greenhouse, and what can I do? What was interesting, though, was about half said, I'm not sure. And the good news is there are a number of really meaningful things you can do at home that will have an impact. First off, in terms of your energy use, because if we can cut use, that helps right away. Now, the most green plant we have is the one we didn't have to build. So if you have not already converted to things like the LED, the light-emitting diode light bulbs, do it. They use about 10% of the energy of a conventional bulb and even about a third of the energy of a compact fluorescent. So if you're still on the older styles, convert to the LEDs. I know at my house, about 10 years ago, we began that conversion sort of journey. We use about 2/3 of the energy that we used at home 10 years ago, even as my kids grew up. So it's very effective. Second is we have home energy audits as well, and our folks can come out, they can look at your house, they do a number of tests with an infrared camera to check out your insulation, they use what's called the blower door, so they see if you have leaks, and then they'll give you a set of custom recommendations for your house and ideas on how to, say, change to a more efficient heating system, perhaps a more efficient heat pump water heater. So a couple of things there. Take advantage of easy switches like the light bulbs, and then if you are thinking about doing something bigger, go online and dial up an appointment for one of our energy efficiency audits, or you can call our energy advisors, and they can help you with that as well. So a couple of really easy things. If you haven't started that journey, I'd recommend it. You'll save a little money, but along the way, you'll also end up really helping out the planet too.
Thanks for your question, Lisa. We're going to pause for a minute, and I'm going to give you the results of the first poll that we had. And as a reminder, the question was, what is the most important issue facing the state of Washington today? And 51% of you felt that the environmental issues, including climate change, was most important. A close second was homelessness and housing affordability at 20%, and at 14% transportation, then 9% education, ending with 6% public safety. We will go ahead and go to our next caller. Karen, you're on live with Andy Wappler.
Thank you. Hi, Andy. My question is about outages on the island. One of the things I love about living on Bainbridge is all of our trees, but I know that the trees are also a big cause of our outages, and I'm just wondering what PSC can do or is doing to minimize that.
It's certainly a rough winter. There's no doubt about that. And Bainbridge really gets it in a couple of ways. Beautiful location, wonderful to be there on the island with the water, wonderful to have the trees. Unfortunately, being in the middle of Puget Sound means you get a front row seat to every storm and almost no protection regardless of which way the wind blows. And most of our big storms, like in the fall, are a south wind, but once in a while we get a north wind as well. Doesn't matter, you get them all. So that's the first challenge on Bainbridge. The second, of course, are the trees. And while we do a lot of tree trimming within the right-of-way along our corridor, our trees out here in the Northwest are tall, and you wouldn't want to take out every tree that could potentially fall into a power line. It would look wrong. It wouldn't look like home anymore. So we're careful about tree trimming. The other that we've done over the last 10 years is to go through on the neighborhood level and really work to provide that, as I mentioned before, the distribution line, so the line from the nearby substation out to your neighborhood and down your street. About half, a little more of that, of the island's power lines are now underground. That's great. They can't get hit by that tree, although they still sometimes fail, tree roots and water and everything else. But working to underground, working to put in what we call tree wire, which is a insulated wire that's also even Teflon coated. It helps shed some of those smaller branches. And then a lot of projects here over the last year, and I know we had some going just last week on the island, so sorry if you had to wait in the backup for the flaggers, but putting in the tree wire, working to harden the system, replace poles, all of that. And then bigger picture, a couple years back now, the two main lines that come over to the island from the actual peninsula side, those were both replaced on both north and south legs, and then on to the island to our northernmost substation at Port Madison. So those are all some of the fixes over the last 10 years. The last piece, though, is to connect the substations on the island so that every substation is fed with power from two directions. So every substation has a backup. And that'll be something we'll be talking about a bit more in the fall, but I think once we do that, you'll see a noticeable jump in the reliability on the island.
Thank you, Karen. Our next question comes from Winifred. Winifred, you're live.
Oh, good evening. Well, first of all, thank you, PSE, for working with the state legislature to improve our climate impacts. I mean, I think it's really great that PSE has made the commitment to retire a number of these coal plants and bring on cleaner renewables. My question is, and the previous callers sort of asked some of the same question, but it really had to do with what specifically is PSE looking to do on Bainbridge Island with regards to improving reliability. And you mentioned closing the transmission loop, and I guess my question is, do you have any details on that yet, or is that still a work in progress, and when can we maybe hear or see something with regard to that?
That is certainly the big step, and I'll try to get some specifics in a moment, but let me try to paint a picture with words, if I can, of, okay, what are we talking about? And if we all were in front of a whiteboard, it would be easier. But if you imagine, we have 3 substations on the island, and those are where the power comes in and gets divided out to your neighborhood. Each one serves about 4,000 homes, so pretty big. We have 3. One is at the north, up in Port Madison. One is to the east in the center of the island at Murden Cove, and then to the far south is the one at Winslow. If you imagine sort of an upside-down Y, the line comes from the Port Madison substation down to Winslow, and it's a pretty long run down the island, something like 6 miles. And then a line comes from Port Madison over to Murden Cove. The trouble is, if a tree falls on that long line to Winslow, the Winslow substation is cut off, and there's no other line to get power to the Winslow substation. And of course, that has a big impact because many, many homes are connected to the Winslow substation. Obviously, downtown is connected to it. The ferry service can be impacted. Traffic lights on 305, you name it. So a lot of the island's life and services and everything else is impacted when Winslow goes out. What we're looking at now is how do we connect the Winslow and Murden Cove substations so that every substation, instead of being like a Y, it's like a triangle with all the pieces connected so that if a tree falls, you can always come the other direction. And we first talked to people on the island about 10 years ago about that. And at the time, there was certainly some pushback from people. They were concerned about trees and other things that certainly make sense. And honestly, we were coming off of a couple of years where we hadn't had one of those kinds of outages where the whole substation had been out. So the need wasn't as apparent. Well, you fast forward to now, and we've had a lot of those outages the last 3 or 4 years because we've had just stormier weather than we had for a period. So we've had more than 20 outages that would have been preventable if we could connect the 2 substations. And what we're looking at now, and we'll be talking a bit more about in the fall, is how do we connect those 2 substations And this is why this has taken a little, probably longer if you've been part of this conversation for a bit, technology is really changing. So we don't want to just do what we did 10 years ago and say, hey, we brushed off that plan, here it is again. We're also looking at ways that technology can help us. And there's still some technologies out there. You might have seen Elon Musk just talking today about a big battery project. Some things are still kind of out there in the world of press releases and tweets, but there are some real changes we can make today too. So we're looking at connecting the substations as well as using batteries and different kinds of remote switching and other technologies that weren't there 10 years ago. And I think we can make a big difference with those, and we'll be looking to try and talk in more detail about that just in a couple of months.
Thank you, Winifred, and thank you, Andy. At this time, I just want to remind you all, feel free to please press *3 on your touch-tone phone if you do have a question, and you can get in the queue. Now I'd like to go to Wallace. Wallace, you are on live to ask your question.
All right, Andy. I want to know what PSE is doing in the event of a large solar storm, a mass coronal ejection, which in 1859 shut down all the telegraph lines in the country, burned up some wires, shocked some telegraph operators, and if it happened today, would probably put a half to three-quarters of the country without electricity. I understand there are protections for that. What is PSE doing to mitigate damage from that type of a storm?
Well, Wallace, you know your weather history. That is certainly one of the great weather and kind of climate events of all time, and it did do a lot of damage then. And I would say we're probably fairly vulnerable if something like that happened again. The only thing I'd say that might be, mitigating to some degree is if something like that happened again, most of the stuff we all plug in wouldn't work anyway. But unfortunately, it would be a real issue. We are part of a couple of different national groups to work with other utilities on several different things that I think are similar to that. One are what you're talking about, solar flares. The others are things like an electromagnetic pulse, the possibility that another country could bring an electromagnetic pulse, probably a remote possibility, thankfully, but one to look at, as well as on cybersecurity. A little bit different subject, but same idea in sense of a large-scale event that could take down the grid. We find our best prospect is to have redundancy in the system, as well as to have protection from those sorts of events, being mindful when you build in the first place, and then learning from other utilities, all right, what are they doing, what are we doing, what is considered state-of-the-art and best practice. And I guess at the end of the day, I'd say the idea of something like that, or at my house a few weeks ago, we were woken up in the middle of the night by that little earthquake. I live over on the east side of King County, so I could feel that earthquake. A good reminder with any of these things that for all of us, despite the fact that it's beautiful and sunny now, having that home preparedness kit, being ready for maybe an earthquake, maybe a storm, some other kind of event, is a good idea. We will certainly do what we can as a utility to be ready, but at the end of the day, I think we will all have to make sure that we do have kind of those recommended items. And if you are looking for what should I have at home for storms and other things, we have that information on the safety pages at psc.com, so recommendations for the Red Cross.
Thank you for your question, Wallace. Before we go to the next question, and if you do have questions, again, I'd like to remind you to hit *3 to get into the queue. What I'd like to do now is go to our second poll. The question for you is, what is the most important issue facing Bainbridge Island today? Press 1 for housing costs and affordability. Press 2 for traffic and transportation. Press 3 for electric reliability. Press 4 for attracting and retaining business on the island. And press 5 for impacts from growth and development. I'll repeat that one more time. What is the most important issue facing Bainbridge Island today? Press 1 for housing costs and affordability. 2 for traffic and transportation. Press 3 for electric reliability. Press 4 for attracting and retaining business on the island. And press 5 for impacts from growth and development. And so in a few minutes, we will get that categorized and let you know what the results are. Next, we are going to go to Marilyn. Marilyn, would you like to talk about renewable energies?
Yeah, thank you. I'm just interested in hearing more details about the pathway to 100% renewables. Like, do you have plans for building new solar or wind installations in the state or elsewhere? And when will all the coal be gone, et cetera?
Sure. The coal part is really easy. We are closing, well, let me start with this. We get power from coal plants in Montana today, and about half of that plant is closing by the end of this year. And now with the state legislation, the rest of the plant will have to close by 2025. So coal's gone in about 5.5 years or less, and that's great news. So that's part one. The second part is a little bit more complicated. So I'll wind back to in May, the state passed the Clean Energy Transformation Act, really some landmark legislation, and folks have certainly heard Governor Inslee talking about it. He's been campaigning for president, and it really is a landmark in the country. It puts us on to being carbon neutral by 2030 and carbon free by 2045, and it is going to be a very different world for us in terms of energy. But what that is going to take for all of us is a bit of a transition and a little bit of waiting, because the legislature passed, in effect, the goals. Now, today, it's up to the Utilities Commission and other stakeholders to get together to say, okay, what are the rules to make that happen? And in fact, today was the kickoff of that process down in Olympia at the Utilities and Transportation Commission, and we were a part of that. Utilities are required to file a plan by 2022 in terms of what they're going to be doing, and then that work will go forward from 2022 and after. So there'll be a couple of years here of planning and rulemaking, but after that, we will see more clean energy. A couple things that are happening right now, though, where we were already working ahead of that. Mentioned coal strip, so half of the plant's closing by the end of the year. The other exciting thing that comes online here in early 2020, we have been building the first wind farm in western Washington. It will be our fourth wind farm in the state. We've been building that wind farm, and it comes online in early 2020, and it is down on kind of the Lewis-Thurston County land line on some former timberland. That's extremely exciting. It's part of our Green Direct program for corporations. And then for homeowners, we have today Green Power and Solar Choice, where you can sign up right now to be carbon free. So if you want it today, we can do that. But that path through the legislature, great forward vision, some rulemaking ahead. But I think that transition is really underway and is going to make us a real leader, keep us a leader in terms of being a clean energy state.
Marilyn, thanks for your question. Next up, we have Nathan. Nathan, you're on. Nathan, are you there?
Yes, hello. My question is, I recently relocated into Washington after being gone for a little while, and started service with Puget Sound Energy, and received a little notice that described the energy sources for Puget Sound Energy. And I was surprised to see that coal was actually the largest source of energy for Puget Sound Energy. And I'm just kind of curious in Washington how it got to be so high when we have such a large hydroelectric plants.
It's an excellent question, and I think in part of it is just growth in our state. If you think about our state, we were years ago, I remember something like the 17th or 23rd largest state, and I think now we're the 13th. We've gone from something like 4 million people in 1980 to 7 million here today, and growing every day. And in that time, we haven't added any hydropower. And the hydropower we are talking about in Washington, some of the plants have been upgraded, including our Snoqualmie Falls hydro plant. We just upgraded that in 2013 at our Baker facility in Skagit County. But in general, the hydro we have is the hydro that was built in the 30s and 50s. And so we haven't seen our hydro base grow nearly as much as our population growth. And while we are better at saving energy than we used to be, there are more people. And in Washington, we went from being one of the least air-conditioned parts of the country to still at the lower end, but we have a much higher summertime energy use. The other aspect of this is we used to be able to bring in energy from California. As California's grown, they don't have much to export either. Going forward, though, that coal is out of the picture by 2025 under the new state legislation, and even sooner than that for some of the units. And then going forward, our process for new power plants is also governed by the state regulations. And essentially what we do is we have to issue what we see as our renewable and other energy needs in the future, so planning out 5, 10, 15, 20 years. We do that every 2 years, give that snapshot of what's going forward in the future, and then we receive proposals from different power producers and others for, okay, if you think your need is X, how do you meet that need? The exciting thing is in our most recent RFP round, the winners have been wind and solar, and increasingly even storage doing better. So we will see a lot more of that coming in. We are required as a regulated utility to pick the least cost option for our customers, but increasingly that least cost option is renewable energy and also storage. And then kind of a little kicker, that new state law allows us to look at cost a little bit more flexibly than we did in the past, including what's the carbon impact. And it's probably surprising if you're thinking about us as a green state. That wasn't something that was part of the laws before. The laws dated back to the 50s and even earlier. They only looked at what's the delivered cost of the energy. The new legislation also includes the ability to look at the carbon impact cost and say, okay, let's look at the real total cost of an energy source, not just the delivered cost. That will help speed up that transition. But I agree, it is probably surprising if you imagine that, well, we're in Washington and we're all hydro. We're actually not. So I think this is a great chance to turn that around and get back to being even cleaner than we've been.
Thanks for your great question, Nathan. And it looks like we have still lots of questions coming in. And I'd like to remind you to please, if you want to ask any questions, please press *3 and we can get you in the queue. I'm going to pause for a minute and share with you the results of our second poll. The question was, what is the most important issue facing Bainbridge Island today? And 46% of you felt that impacts from growth and development was most important. And at 23%, electric reliability, 18% housing costs and affordability, and at 13%, traffic and congestion, and no one picked attracting and retaining business on the island. So we will go ahead and go to our next caller. David, you had a question about reliability. You're online live with Andy Wappler.
Andy, my question is reliability specifically of the distribution network. For the last several years, PSC has been telling island residents of the availability of a cost-sharing program under the Public Utility Commission guidelines for sharing of undergrounding costs. You spoke of that earlier this evening. When are we going to see a tangible plan for this type of partnership for undergrounding of the distribution network here on the island? We need something that we can act on as citizens and voters ultimately.
For sure, and I think that is something we'll be talking about here later this year and into early next year. It is something that can make a big difference. The only thing, though, that I would sort of give a little asterisk to undergrounding is we do have a lot of underground outages. And I think for folks, as we're talking about that issue going forward of let's make it underground, it is important to recognize it is considerably more expensive. But the other is it's not perfect. And I'll give you just a little example. Overhead lines tend to go out in the wintertime when it's windy, obviously, and trees are falling down and all of that. Underground tend to go out in the summer, which may seem sort of counterintuitive, but it's because the lines themselves, they get hot. And when they're overhead, they actually can shed that heat and be sort of air-cooled. When they're underground, there isn't any place for that heat to go. So underground cables actually do tend to fail in the summer, and we very often call it cable storms. And we will get outages this time of year and into August and beyond in hot weather where underground cables fail. So, yes, we can do undergrounding, and that's a conversation we want to have with the island, but I want to make sure when we do have it that it's an honest conversation and that everyone can see that, one, the underground power lines aren't perfect. They fail too, unfortunately, and when they do, it can be longer to replace them because it can be harder to detect the failure. But I think that is a solution that certainly could help on the island. I do think, though, it's a solution that it's important for all of us to talk about in its entirety because it is a help, but like everything else, it's not a magic bullet.
Thank you, David. We will now, our next caller is Herb. Herb, would you go ahead and state your question about solar?
Okay, yes. As you're replacing the coal-fired power plants with new things, what fraction is going to be from solar, what fraction will come from wind, and what fraction will come from plants that burn fracked gas that are much dirtier than solar and wind?
I don't know the answer to that today. I can tell you, though, how we're going to get to the answer, which is through that process as a regulated utility of the integrated resource plan that we file every 2 years with the state, and then we say, okay, this is what we think we're going to need, the amount of energy, and then we receive submissions from all those different kinds of facilities you're talking about, wind, solar, natural gas, battery storage, also what's called demand response, which is the way to actually meet the energy need by preventing it in the first place. All of those, in effect, are competitors in this process. The good news right now, though, is the solar cost has come down substantially, and in particular, solar from eastern Washington has done very well in this process for us, and wind as well, and the wind is less of a surprise. We actually built our first wind plant in the Pomeroy area, eastern Washington, in 2005. We've also been building in 2009 and 2012 as well. So right now we're, I think, the third largest utility operator of wind in the country. And frankly, the more we have, the better it works because generally speaking, it's kind of windy all the time somewhere. So I think we will have more solar and more wind. But what we don't get to do in this process is pick a predetermined outcome and go build it. We actually have to have proof that that is the best choice for the customer, but increasingly through this whole process and with technology changing, the renewables work and are working better than they have worked before. The last thing I'll throw in there that's kind of interesting, we're getting better as a region in the West of trading energy back and forth between utilities using technology, sort of like eBay or anything else. So now energy can be traded almost up to the minute, whereas years ago it was day before. That's fantastic because that's helping minimize the total number of plants that have to get built anywhere in the West because we can do better at sharing. And environmentally, again, the best plant is the one that didn't have to get built in the first place, and that technology, that trading, is helping all utilities in the West share more and build less.
Thank you, Herb. Our next caller is Mike. Mike, you're live with Andy Wappler.
Hi, Andy.
Mike,
I think that, I am here. I think you've already answered the question. It was that, as you know, you need to phase out of coal by 2025. So the question was, what are you going to replace that with? I think you probably already answered that question. So if you did, could I ask a different one?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so the other one is, as you probably know, the Bainbridge Island contributes, I think, approximately $150,000 to the Green Direct program. I was wondering if you would entertain, or PSC would entertain, and instead of giving that money to you to then go buy energy other places, to invest that right here on the island to create community solar project or something else where we are generating the power on island.
I think that's a great idea, and local energy is certainly exciting. In terms of the programs, though, when we buy, say, if we buy energy from a renewable energy source that we don't own, that's outside the company, we aren't allowed as a company to make money off of that. We can source that energy, but we actually have to sell it to you for the cost that we buy it from. So there is that. But a couple of different projects have taken place on the island that we've been really great to have partners with to bring some renewable energy, partly through our green power Wappler program, which is that residential choice. And congratulations to Bainbridge. You continue to be right about the top in our whole service area. About 1,300 participants on Bainbridge Island alone in that program. And that's the program that allows you to have some or all of your energy sourced from small carbon-free providers, everything from wind and solar to biogas. That's the farm power where they take the manure and make power out of that, and geothermal, all these things that are here in the Northwest. And in doing that, we've done a couple different solar demonstration projects on the island at both the community center and also at Sakai Intermediate School. The other project that's been very exciting on the island, it was a demonstration we did at a couple different locations at the Harbor Public House and at Pleasant Beach Village, which was the horse digester, which took waste from both of those kitchens and turned it into energy. If you saw it, particularly if you were down at the Harbor Pub and you saw it there, perhaps you saw two of them if you stayed at the Harbor Pub for a long time. If you saw it there, it looked like a shipping container out in front, and they would take the trash and everything else from their kitchen, and then they would break that down and make energy. So it has been exciting to do some of these demonstration projects on the island. I hope we can do more in the future. But Bainbridge has been a leader that really has put its money where its mouth is in terms of signing on to things like green power and solar as well. And that's great. That really points the way for a lot of communities.
Thanks for your question, Mike. I'm going to pause for a minute and go to our last polling question. And that question is, when it comes to your electric service, what do you consider to be the most important? Press 1 for cost or rates. Press 2 for where my energy comes from. Press 3 for energy conservation programs. Press 4 for reliability and response to outages. That question again is, when it comes to your electric service, what do you consider to be the most important? 1 for cost or rates. Press 2 where my energy comes from. Press 3 for energy conservation programs. And press 4 for reliability and response to outages. So we still have some more phone calls, and so I am going to go ahead and go to Charles. Charles, you have a question about reliability. You're on with Andy.
Hi, Andy. I know that PSC has been planning on improving the reliability of the system with tree wires and other measures. Looping the system is something that's been mentioned, I know, for at least 3 or 4 years and probably longer than that. So I was hoping that you guys were moving more into the build and design phase. And is it sounding like you guys are going to be announcing or actually moving closer to implementation in the fall?
We will be, Charles. And I'll tell you, part of the reason things have taken longer was really us trying to catch up to the pace of technology. And there's a bit of a asymmetrical thing here in terms of, we're building long-term infrastructure. You want to build it once, hopefully, and have it work for decades. At the same time, you're trying to catch up with rapid changes in technology, everything from, if you saw again the Tesla announcement, they've got another battery product out there for utilities, everything like that that's changing, as well as trying to keep our forecast of energy demand in sync with how people are using energy today, and that's changing significantly, everything like those LED light bulbs and others. So for us, it's a bit of that balance between trying to come up with a plan that is durable, because we know that if we're building, say, a transmission line on the island, we want to do that once and not do that again for decades, but at the same time try to accommodate all those different changes that are coming in technology and users and growth in the community. I think we have been smart to take that step back and slow our process a bit. I know a couple of years ago when I was on the island, I was talking about it, frankly, as if we would have been out there already. And so I'm sorry about that in terms of for people going, okay, when's this actually going to happen? But I think as we are talking about it, we have done, I think, the right thing, trying to have a deeper look at what we can do through some technologies and making sure we come up with the right plan. But that is something that we'll be talking about here coming up in the fall, which I suspect all of a sudden will come at us all pretty quickly.
Thank you, Charles. And we have time for 2 more questions, and then we will review the results of the last poll. So our next caller is Michael. Michael, you're on live to talk about reliability.
Hi, Andy. Thanks for taking my call. My neighbors live at the very south end of Bainbridge Island, And we're pretty convinced that we're much less reliable than the rest of the island, and I think it has something to do with the fact that we're at the end of the line. Is there anything special that can fix that kind of a problem? Because I think probably many people on Bainbridge Island are at the end of the line.
Well, and you are, and that really is that issue of having two of the three substations on the island having only a single source of power. So in that sense, I mean, you're dead on. You are at the end of the line there at Winslow, and it is a long line from Port Madison down really kind of cross country down the island. Again, I think something like 6 miles. So that's a long line. And then that other leg, if you picture again, this is an upside down Y or a wishbone. You're on one leg, and then the other leg of that Y comes from Port Madison out toward the east, toward the Murden Cove area. It's not quite as long of a run, but still, it's a single feed to that substation. So, yeah, there are two parts of the island that legitimately can say, I'm at the end of the line. If you are served off of Port Madison further north, it's a double line that serves Port Madison, so your reliability is a bit better. Making that connection at the south end from Murden Cove, kind of middle and east of the island, down to Winslow at the south, that will result in a dramatic improvement in the outages. And I'll say it, not only is your reliability in Winslow probably worse than most people in the island, it's some of the worst we have in our system. I live in the Redmond area. I live in an area where my substation has multiple feeds. I had an outage a few months back. It was the first one I'd had in about 10 years. And I want people on Bainbridge Island to enjoy that same kind of reliability. Now, you might still have a few more outages. You've got a few more trees. It's an island. You get more wind. But we'd like to make it so that it's a surprise and not a, yes, I know exactly where my flashlight is because I just put it down. And making that connection between the substations, which will be a part of our plan going forward, that is key. If we aren't able to do that, you might see incremental improvements like we've made over the last 10 years. You won't see the big step change. That's why we need to do that.
Thank you, Michael. Andy, I think we have one more question. Are you ready for one more?
Sure.
All right. We have David. David, you have a question about hydroelectric energy. You're on live.
Yeah, Andy, Dave here. A number of Bitcoin miners have scooped up an awful lot of hydropower on the eastern side of the Cascades. And my question is, why didn't Puget Sound Energy go in and get some of that low-cost hydropower, which is reliable, to replace the coal mine plant in Montana? Are you not allowed to buy that?
In some cases we are, and I have to say just parenthetically, I am very glad for our sake we have not had to deal with the Bitcoin mining that has been very challenging for a lot of utilities in central and eastern Washington, and in some cases driven up costs for their residential customers. So kind of glad that isn't happening as much here for us in western Washington. But we do actually get a substantial portion of our hydropower from what are called the mid-sea hydro projects, particularly from Chelan County, and those power projects that are owned by some of the county PUDs along the Columbia River. There's really a mix on the Columbia River of federal power from the Bonneville Power Association, from the Bonneville Power Administration, from the BPA that we actually can't buy as a private company. Now, you as a customer get a little credit on your bill because you're a taxpayer, so you get a little credit back on your bill because we can't buy that BPA power. But we do buy and can buy power from some of the dams that are owned by the PUDs in central and eastern Washington, and we do that today. And it is a great low-cost source of power. The other aspect of it that's great is it tends to be a reliable, steady source of power. But, as we've all been reading here probably in the news, concern over salmon, concern over orcas, even some talk about removing power dams on the Snake River mean that hydro is probably a more challenging prospect going forward in the future than it has been in the past. There really is no easy source of energy. They all have an impact of one form or another, whether it's carbon or fish or visual or land use. And again, probably bottom line, if you're on the call tonight, you're interested in energy. That's fantastic. Take advantage of the rebates and programs we have to help you use less. take advantage of things like that home energy assessment, because the best thing all of us can do for the environment is to make sure we're using energy as smart as we can, because every power plant, every transmission line has an impact. It really is that negawatt, the watt you didn't use, that's the one you want to focus on too.
Thank you for your question, David. Now I'd like to share with you the results of our last poll. As a reminder, the question was, when it comes to your electric service, what do you consider to be the most important? And over 53% of you felt that reliability in response to outages was the number one out of this list. And then tied for second and third were cost or rates and where my energy comes from. And then at 9% in last place was energy conservation programs. So it looks like we are out of time to answer any more questions. But that doesn't mean you're out of luck, because if we weren't able to get to your question tonight, I ask that you go ahead and stay online, and you will have the opportunity to leave a voicemail at the end of the call, assuming that you went ahead and hit *3. I'd like to thank all of you for participating this evening and having a conversation with us. I would like to now turn it over to Andy for some closing remarks. Andy?
Thanks, Renee, and thanks everybody for taking part here tonight. It's fantastic to see a community that's really interested in this subject. Sometimes when you say I work at the utility, people edge away and don't think it's that interesting. It is interesting when you dig into it, and you sure all have tonight. We are proud to be a partner with Bainbridge Island and the region. There's so much going on with renewable energy, including the things that I think we can do on the island and across the state, as well as items in the community. And going forward, we want to continue the clean energy conversation. It's exciting what began here today with the State Commission in terms of the rulemaking and workshops around the Clean Energy Transition Act, and then coming up here later this year, really working together on what can we do to improve the reliability on the island. We all want energy to be cleaner. We all need it to get to our house, and we think we can help on both fronts. So thank you for taking part here tonight. Again, if we didn't get to a question, you can go to our psebainbridge.com website and fire a question in there, and we look forward to talking again sometime soon before the end of the year about reliability. Thank you very much for being with us tonight. Have a great and safe evening. Bye-bye.